Months on from one of the closest local government elections in the country's history, how does the voting public view Andrew Holness, Mark Golding, JLP, or PNP? We send the data scientists from Blue Dot Insights into the field to canvass the views of the public, and the results are in! Tune into Nationwide 90 FM and all our social media platforms from Monday, September 23 to Friday, September 27, as we reveal how the voting public feels about the Prime Minister and Opposition Leader, plus the parties they lead. This is the best advertising opportunity anywhere on radio over this period, so do contact our sales department at 876-630-1210. It's the Nationwide Blue Dot Polls. I would side a lead.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans for justice. The people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, the people demand. Right to life and security. Oh, what a joy. Oh, what a peace. How great this country could be. Respecting your rights. Respecting human rights. What a wonderful nation this could be. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention and police brutalization. Class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty.
Happy Monday. Welcome to another episode of Let's Start Justice. Jade and I are not in studio this week because of the rainfalls that were expected. It was quite heavy in the morning here in Kingston, Jamaica, but it's looking a little bit cloudy out now, but we are having our show from our offices here at JFJ. My name is Michael Jackson, Executive Director.
And I'm Jade Williams, Policy and Advocacy Specialist.
No, so exciting topic. Well, it's exciting to me, and I hope the listeners who are joining us via the YouTube platform and Nationwide, JFJ's own YouTube page, social media, and those who are listening via traditional radio. I hope it's going to be exciting for you. We're talking constitutional reform, the road to republic, and today is the first in a series of conversation that we're going to be having on this particular topic. However, this topic for today is going to be focusing on the president and what we want that presidential model to look like as we talk about transitioning from the Governor General. And we're going to be joined by Professor Rosalie Hamilton. So, Jade, you're excited with me on this topic?
I am interested. I don't know if I'll say excited, but I'm definitely interested.
All right. So the week that was, interest, excitement, it's all welcome. So the week that was that we're going to quickly touch on, it's two things. We have taken note about the Violence Prevention Commission report that was submitted to the Office of the Prime Minister. And if you remember, that particular commission is led by Maureen Sams Vaughan. It's going to be having recommendations how to address domestic violence, corporal punishment, and just how to do general violence prevention and control in the country. So we're looking forward to that particular report becoming public, and then we can have further discussions around the recommendations once we are made aware of the same. The other matter I just want to quickly touch on before we go into the substantive topic of today. Last week, we had raised some concerns from our end here at JFJ following a report, coming from the Jamaica Gleaner regarding the establishment of the Access to Information Tribunal. Now, following that report and the areas that were flagged as areas of concern from Attorney at Law Andre Earl, We have since been advised as a country by the Information Minister, Dr. Dana Dixon, that the ATI Tribunal will be established soon. Now, if our listeners would recall, the Access to Information Tribunal is required under the Access to Information Act to ensure that your constitutional rights to seek and receive information is so guaranteed. So if you submit an ATI request to any government agency or ministry or department, and they do not comply with the ATI Act, then you would have an opportunity to appeal that decision or whatever issues you would have come across. Now, this particular tribunal has not been in effect. No tribunal was established since about February of this year. Several months have passed. And though we have gotten the update that one would be established, I don't recall a timeline being shared by Dr. Dixon. And while we welcome the update, it is still problematic that we don't have an idea of when, so that we can hold the government to account. And the bigger conversation, part of which we're going to be having today, if it is that the Governor General is to be the one appointing these bodies or these persons, who do we hold accountable? Do we hold the office of the Prime Minister accountable or the Governor General's office accountable? How do we hold the leader of the opposition accountable as well? Because this is a remnant or reminiscent rather of a similar issue that we had early on in the year around the Public Services Commission. If it is that these requirements under the Constitution, under different statutory laws are not being done, who do we hold accountable? Remember, all of these positions that we have mentioned, they have gotten significant increases, I believe some 200%. And if you're paying people, bodies, offices, millions of dollars, who do we hold accountable? Do we say that the office of the contract of the Governor General is ceremonial and therefore we hold the Prime Minister's office accountable? Who do we hold accountable? Food for thought, but it cannot continue where we have these important bodies that need to be established, and then it's not until some media report flag an issue that you're hearing that, oh, this tribunal, the PSC, has not been established. I think we have to be thinking differently about accountability going forward, because certainly as a country, we need to do better. Right?
Right. Thank you for that, Mikkel. So I think I can go straight into our right of the day and our trivia question for today. So our right of the day for today comes from section 13.3M of the Constitution, and that focuses on our right of every citizen in Jamaica to be qualified to register as an elector for elections to the House of Representatives and to be so registered, and for those who are registered to vote in free and fair elections. So that is under section 13.3M of our Constitution. And shortly, it's our right to vote. Now, we also have a trivia question for today. And for those of you bright sparks, today's trivia prize is a little bit extra because the question is a two-pronged question. So the question is, when was the last change to the Constitution made? And what was the change that was made? So if you know the response, you can send a WhatsApp to 2397583. You can also respond in the live chat on Nationwide's YouTube or on JFJ's YouTube, or you can respond on our Instagram, JA for Justice.
Alrighty, so the exciting topic for today, constitutional reform, Road to the Republic. Now, we have not had major changes to our constitution since becoming independent in 1962. The last major change, and I'm using the word major here because of Jade's trivia question, happened in 2011 when we had our Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom. When we look at the comprehensive effort that was taken in the 1990s, there is a very good report that I still urge people to go and read, because it had recommendations coming from all areas of civil society and the public regarding whether or not we should make changes to our Senate, the types of electoral reforms Unfortunately, several of those recommendations were not taken up, but again, we recognize the last major change, not the last change, no, the last major change being our Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom in 2011. Now, in this current dispensation of constitutional reform, you would recall that we're going through a three-phase process, and we're now in phase one. We have a little bit of a challenge with that phased approach, but just to indicate that in phase one, the Constitutional Reform Committee that was established by the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, they're going to be looking at what you call specially entrenched provisions. Those are the major things that require not only the two-third majority vote in Parliament, but also a referendum by the people to make change. One of those major changes would include changes to the head of state, which is currently the monarchy represented by the Governor General in Jamaica, to becoming or adopting a new president. The question is, what type of president are we looking at? That's the conversation for today. But just to indicate that in the other two and in phase 2 and 3 of the constitutional reform process, we're going to be looking at other areas, for example, the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, right? So just to give you that general synopsis of what is to come and the major topic for today.
And I'll just tack on to that JFJ would have made some oral presentations to the Constitutional Reform Committee last week on the phase one part of the constitutional reform process. So I do believe you could still access that stream if you are so inclined.
All right, so we're joined today by Professor Rosalie Hamilton, an expert in the area. She's also founder of ILE. Sorry, my mind, when it's Monday. Can you remind us, Institute of
Law and Economics, yes.
Yes. So we thank you, Prof, for joining us. But just before we get into the conversation with you, so the listeners can be aware, we're going to be talking about what your very good article that you wrote several weeks ago about what type of presidential models we're looking at, the dangers of some of the other systems that people perhaps would be calling for, the powers of the Governor General and how we transition those powers to the office of the presidency, and what type of presidential model, executive versus non-executive. So just to have the listeners be aware of what we're going to be discussing as they stay tuned, but we take the break.
Here's to the early risers, and we are here all-nighters. The go the extra milers, and let's do it until it works. Workers. People who are powerful because they power through. Day after day. Challenge after challenge. You see, true power, it's not something you can buy or collect. It is something that starts on the inside, and you always know it when you see it. Sunshine Snack Peanuts. Proud supporters of the powerful.
I'm not sure if something is from my end. We're back.
I don't think so, not quite yet.
Welcome back to Let's Start Justice this is what happens when you're playing remote hosting of a show. But thank you so much for staying tuned. We're discussing the matter that you cautioned the readers about a couple of weeks ago. What is the difference between an executive presidency and a non-executive president?
Okay, so when we talk about the executive, we're really talking about the people that are taking the reins, operational reins of running the country. And we should think about their role as different from the lawmakers, the legislators. And although some individuals who are in the executive wear two hats because they execute the law as well as make the law. And so we want to be clear when we use that term executive, that's what we mean. And so if we're talking about the executive president, we're talking about someone who will be part of the operations of running our country. They are executing the law. And the danger that I try to show in that article is that we have to be very careful that we don't have a president, or in fact, what we now see, which is a prime minister who is not only making the law, but is also executing the law. And while in some jurisdictions you can play both roles, there is more careful, both in terms of law and customs, oversight of that executive decision. And I think that's what is missing in our jurisdiction. And so people think that by, having an executive president, then we can have this clean separation. But you look in other jurisdictions, you say that's not so clean. So there's a lot more details there. So the idea is basically president who is not involved in the day-to-day running and operationalizing our laws is a non-executive president, and one who would be an executive president. Last point I want to make is that a non-executive president is not the same thing as a ceremonial president.
Yes.
Because there's a view that, nobody wants a ceremonial president because we shouldn't be paying all this whole heap of money to have someone just goes to ceremonies. We can't afford that. And I understand that sentiment very well. I think the idea of the non-executive president, the roles and responsibilities have to be clarified so as to not to equate the ceremonial functions that any president would engage, whether executive or non-executive for that matter. But there's a kind of leadership ceremonial responsibility, but also responsibility that goes to the running of the country.
Yes. Thanks so much for that clarification. And I think the best example of an executive presidential model that people may be more familiar with is the United States,
Right.
where you see the functions of both head of state is vested and head of government is vested in currently President Biden, formerly before you had President Trump. Versus in the non-executive model, then you would see the difference with those particular functions. So just indicate that the US presidential system is perhaps the one that a lot of people are most familiar with, that we can look at. Right?
So I just wanted to quickly follow up on that, because if we are saying then that an executive president has certain responsibilities and a non-executive president doesn't, I would imagine that the only way that a non-executive president could exist would be ceremonial. So how does a non-executive president end up with powers, and what does that really look like?
All right. Well, we can look at our current arrangement. We have a governor general who, in some jurisdictions, as you know, there's simply a shift from the governor general to the president. And it's an easy shift because the roles and responsibilities are similar. A non-executive president tends to undertake similar roles as these governor generals. But in our case, if we have to look very carefully at our rules, because the Constitution does provide that the Governor General undertake responsibilities that are in the Constitution. And so while our Governor General undertakes, ceremonial functions, swearing in, and so on, there are other kinds of important roles that the Governor General plays. And those include, for example, the selection of members of Services Commission, other kinds of actions that can be construed as executive because they influence the running of the country. And so in that sense, the important appointments that are made, these members of the Services Commissions is a good example. And in fact, one could write other functions and roles into the Constitution that can, if you like, give the Governor General work to do, because people see that the conceive of the ceremonial functions as not necessarily work.
Yes.
So I think one has to be, and that's why people have heard the term hybrid, right? And there is some kind of limited, if you like, executive function, but it's not typically referred to as an executive role, but it is part of what is required to run the country, but also these kinds of roles having to do with, delivering a throne speech and all those kinds of things. A lot of that could go. When you have a president, you certainly won't have a throne speech, and so on. But there are other kinds of functions that goes to the.
Before you move on, Prof, I just want the listeners, because I think sometimes when we're conversing, I don't want to take for granted that the listeners all appreciate some of the existing powers of the Governor General, and generally appreciate how Parliament operates. So just to quickly add on to some of the points that you raised earlier. When you have commissions of Parliament, bodies that report to Parliament, but they are independent, and you want them to be free from political interference, for example, the Integrity Commission, the Office of the Public Defender, then you would see the Governor General appointing some of these persons within these particular commissions, and then you want to safeguard them from arbitrary termination of appointments, so to speak. So the Governor General would be involved in that process, subject to, for example, a judicial review when you look at the Integrity Commission, because the same bodies that provide a type of oversight, what we call horizontal accountability, you want them to be free from political interference. You have other positions, and you mentioned some of them earlier, but I just want again to add to a few. For example, the Chief Justice and so on, those critical functions that would be appointed by the Governor General. Some of them the Governor General can appoint on his or her own discretion, but for the most part, you find that it's upon the advice of the Prime Minister. And one could argue that even those that the Governor General has that type of discretion to appoint, or to make a decision around, because of our independence, our sovereignty, what you most likely find is that the Governor General simply do what the Prime Minister or the other bodies would recommend. And then importantly, you made mention of the Governor General throne speech. If it becomes the presidential throne speech, that is the opening of Parliament, that sets the tone and the legislative agenda of what Parliament wants to achieve for the year. And then if you could just walk us through, Prof, the lawmaking part of it, the formal approval before bills become law. If you could just
and that's very important, because the idea that we have a signatory to our bills is the completion of that lawmaking process. And there is an important discussion there about whether you want a president to simply rubber stamp and sign these, without more, or whether that process should be a little more thoughtful about, another set of eyes. Obviously not an individual, but a team, the office of the president that has a team that would scrutinize bills. And those are discussions that are in play. But it is important to understand that the head of state would play an important role in completing the legislative process. There's also the idea of the vesting of the executive power of the state in the hands of a head of state that ultimately makes the decision about and formalizes the whole appointments, the election results and the prime minister, leader of the opposition and so on that we see in these swearing in and these official roles. But it's important because that kind of stamping of the authority of the executive is done through our head of state. So, that role in legislative process is quite important.
Mm-hmm. If we could shift the attention a little bit, Prof. I'm not sure if you're in the position now to walk us through what the CRC is recommending. And I want to separate some of the conversation now in terms of the nomination and the election process of the president versus the powers of the president. So I want us to get to the powers at the end, but for the public to appreciate how they can be involved based on what the CRC is recommending. And I can interject, Jade and I, with what JFJ is recommending. But are you able to walk us through what the CRC is proposing?
Before I do that, let us step back a bit, because I think that when we engage and the society is now engaged in this conversation of a president, it's inserted in a conception of where we're going that I think we need to step back and reflect on. The move to a republic is characterized as an important step in the decolonization process. I think we have to unpack that idea. What exactly does that mean? Because remember, at independence, we made one big step on that decolonization role. We no longer had a governor. We moved away from the governor who is actually making these decisions and implementing these decisions, acting as a real monarch in our context, right? And we shifted that change. And so the question is, why has not much changed? You know, if you look at other jurisdictions in the Caribbean, we don't have to go very far, and we can see that they have moved away from the monarch. Right? And they have these colonized.
That thought for me, please, because we're upon the break, and I love the thought process around decolonization and the importance of it before we even get into the specifics.
Roles and responsibilities, absolutely.
So we take the break.
At the Jamaica Customs Agency, we care for our employees, customers, stakeholders, citizens, and our country. Customs cares. The temperature by the Jamaica Customs Agency is
31 degrees Celsius in Kingston City and 28 out west in Montego Bay.
7 months on from one of the closest local government elections in the country's history, how does the voting public view Andrew Holness, Mark Golding, JLP, or PNP? We send the data scientists from Blue Dot Insights into the field to canvass the views of the public, and the results are in! Tune into Nationwide 90 FM and all our social media platforms from Monday, September 23 to Friday, September 27, as we reveal how the voting public feels about the Prime Minister and Opposition Leader, plus the parties they lead. This is the best advertising opportunity anywhere on radio over this period, so do contact our sales department at 876-630-1210. It's the Nationwide Blue Dot Polls. I would side a lead.
Catch the E-Zone with me, the Stinger Honeybee, alongside
Kareem Boy, I think.
as we turn up the heat
in the street. New show.
New vibe.
Same us.
Same us.
Monday to Friday, 3 to 5 p.m.
Right here on Nationwide 90 FM.
We'll bring you entertainment news.
We'll take away your Monday blues.
You don't want to miss a week with us.
We'll talk health.
Well,
jump into the mix.
or the hot seat.
Don't miss the brain buster.
Or the crazy giveaways.
I mean, is this planet Earth?
Is it?
I don't know. Let me check. Either way, it's got a buzz.
And a bugger thing.
Ow.
right, welcome back to Let's Start Justice again. Because we're remote, there's a little bit of a delay and we're not having that good in sync with the producer and the tech team as we would like, but we certainly thank you all for staying with us. We're discussing the matter of constitutional reform, focusing our agenda on the role of the president and what that office would look like. And Professor Rosalie Hamilton was walking us through, I think, the importance of decolonization and that ideological mindset of what true independence look like. Prof, over to you.
Right. So I was making the point that we use the term, and it's a very aggregated, it's a complex concept, because as I said, we've started that process, it's a incremental. Even before independence, there was that move to, moving away from that whole colonial approach and more self-governance. Now, I think having looked at other countries that have focused on, in this move to republic, moving the monarch as head of state and addressing all these symbols that, reminds of our colonial past, we see today that they're not significantly different than us. They're still having these development challenges and they're still having governance challenges. And so I urge us to step back and ask the question, is the issue simply the symbols of colonization and the important issue of the retention of a head of state in the hereditary form of a monarch? Or is it more than that? Is it Jamaican people want something deeper than what could be seen as these important symbolic moves, as important as they are? And I urge us to think about our 500-year journey here in Jamaica, from the indigenous people before even the British came. It has been struggle for freedom, our fight for self-determination, and the struggles of human rights, right? And so when we think about it through these terms, we see parallels today. Today we talk about improving our standard of living. These bread and butter issues, people are saying, what is the link between all of this constitutional reform and those issues that affect our daily lives? And also, we are concerned about our governance arrangements. We're in the throes of what can be seen as another governance crisis here in Jamaica. And so we are concerned about the structure of government that we've inherited, this kind of top-down dominance. And if we look closely, we can see that we've inherited what I call a kind of constitutional design flaw, where we've perpetuated some of the powers of control that was concentrated in the hands of the governor right over to our prime minister. And the powers that existed in these executive councils that later became the Council of Ministers in our cabinet. Right? So it became a kind of very top-down approach to governance. And so if we think about the decolonization process as including, importantly, the shifting of our governance arrangement and structure in the hands of our people, we're moving power closer to the hands of our people, which is what self-determination is about, right? And it's the essence of the freedom that our people have been struggling with for decades. And if we think about our day-to-day desire to lift our standard of living, right? Our poverty rates have declined. The quality of our lives have declined. And if we think about it in those terms, I think that we can get slightly different outcomes with respect to the focus of our conversation around constitutional reform. If we think about it through those lenses, we can see that, the king is not the biggest problem we have, right? As important as it is to move away from those symbols of the past, oppressive symbols of the past, right? And so I think when we think about that way, then we have to ask the question, what do we want our new president in a republic to do? What role, responsibility should that president take on, and therefore, in that context, ask the questions about the method of selecting and appointing that president. So I wanted us to I certainly have come to this discussion in a slightly different way. I think that when you use the macro lens of a decolonization process, then the focus tend to be on let's move the governor general and the monarch as head of state, and because that's the elephant in the room, if you like, with respect to that, the symbolic shift. And I think that it takes us away from the fundamental questions that the average Jamaicans are concerned about. Quite frankly, I think it is true to say that most Jamaicans wouldn't care two hoots whether the king is there or not if their standard of living had grown and if we have the rights and freedoms that we want and we have the power to make the decisions that affect our lives. Most people would prefer that.
Yes,
And while it's not an either or the other, we must have both. I think we need to put this discussion in context. And so when you look at it through those lenses, I think an important question in this conversation is, what exactly do we want our president to do? And one other point, when we think about these key issues, and we can simplify them in terms of two things: the economic concerns that we have on the one hand, and the need to restructure a government that can reflect our will and to move away from what we've inherited as a kind of top-down governor-driven type decision-making process. Yes, we understand we've inherited, the rules are there. We understand that our founding fathers made it very clear that they had no problem with the constitutional framework we inherited. So we made no significant different change until we got to 2011 with Chapter 3. All right, so we understand all of that. And so question then is, what is this design flaw in our constitution that we inherited that we have to change? And I think we can think about it in two ways. We can think about it in terms of the over-centralization of power in the hands of our prime minister with no adequate oversight, and the absence of power in the hands of our people to make and influence the decisions that affect their lives. Now, if we think about it in those terms, then we can ask ourselves, what is the role of the president in that context? Because it's not simply now a conversation about the role of the president, is it? It really now has to be the role of our legislature. We have to consider the dominance of the executive in the legislature, right? Where we have these kind of cabinet dominance of the legislative procedure and discussion.
And have a conversation. No, I'm just explaining to the listeners, agreeing with you, that you would have the cabinet make a decision at cabinet meeting, then you go to the House of Representatives and just say, I'm taking the bill, and then you hear. I love to put not the bench so people can appreciate that that's all that you have going on, and people may were sleeping before, and then when a minister stand up to table a bill, they just knock in support the backbenchers.
Absolutely. So and we Jamaicans have to ask ourselves, is that what we send our representatives to Parliament for? To simply rubber stamp cabinet decisions, right? Ought there to be a role, as is implied in Section 69, subsection 2 of our Constitution, where we hold our cabinet and the Prime Minister accountable to the legislative house, the members of our legislature who are not part of the executive? That's the way we can provide better oversight. That's the context in which you've had, several changes of a prime minister in Britain. It's the people who dominate the parliament, who are not in the executive, that is critical, like many people in the society, about the decisions made by a prime minister. And if we had that system in place, in fact, what's happening right now could trigger a vote of no confidence, but it would have to be led by the members of the majority party, who is dissatisfied, plain wearing their hat of their oversight role because they are there representing the people, not a political party. All right. So that's kind of where we have to get to. And of course, there's an important conversation about the role of the Senate. Because do you want a Senate simply to be rubber stamping decisions again? Or do you want a Senate that can play a more active, deliberative role that may be somehow linked to our development prospects? Those are conversations that we need to have. So I say all of that, and I'll stop now by saying this conversation ought not to be focused as many Jamaicans do, and it's largely because of how the conversation have been driven so far as in this first phase, as a conversation about moving our head of state, right? Without more. I think we have to look at how that head of state fits into our structure of government. Because if, for example, we want to provide more decentralized decisions such that people in communities up and down Jamaica have a direct say in the kinds of decisions that can improve their communities, then we have to ask ourselves, does our head of state play any role in that?
Mm-hmm. No, I'm happy you said that, because one of the issues, I mean, for those of us who understand how Parliament works, for me personally, to be voting on this particular matter in a referendum, Prof and listeners, if you cannot tell me how exactly the relationship between the legislature and the executive is going to be a little bit more balanced, where there's greater accountability, then I'm going to be having some difficulty.
Right.
And I think that is something that the people are also calling for. How do you manage the issue of maladministration and so on in the process of the head of state and the role in all of that? You know, so we can talk about changing from Governor General throne speech to presidential throne speech, but what exactly does that look like? Is it the case where the office of the Prime Minister continuously prepares something and somebody just read it out? But yet still at the end of the day, we don't have a sense of, you promise us 10 bills for the year, but we only got 2. What does accountability looks like? So
absolutely. And that is true whether you have an executive or a non-executive president.
Exactly. So if the gaps, as we have flagged them now, is not really going to be changed, what exactly are we doing? But I want us at the other side of the break, Prof, we have to take the break at 1:45. I want us to get into the election process and what the CRC is proposing and the challenges you have flagged with that, and JFJ can share our own concerns as well. So we take the break.
You ever hear Earthquake call and say, "Hello, Miss Lee, yes, it's me, Earthquake, I come in Tuesday around 10? No, sir. Earthquake does arrive unannounced, and when it come, it shake all sense and sensibility out of we. Remain calm, stay inside, and do the DCH. Drop, cover, hold on. Once the shaking starts, you know it's earthquake. Make a quick move to a safe place. Don't run to the door, we are in the exit. Stairs might broke up or full of people. Elevator, avoid that, because you might get in and poof, power gone, and you're stuck in that box without ear. Drop, cover, hold on.
A message from the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management.
News on the go. The latest stories from Jamaica and around the world are literally a finger tap away. Keep up to date with Teen Revolution 24 hours a day online via nationwideradiojm.com. Listen live, read the latest stories, hear every soundbite. Be a part of the vibrant online debate via Facebook and Twitter. Now you can get all your favorite premium nationwide content at your convenience. Visit the Android Play Store and download it for free today. NationwideRadioJM.com. All day, every day. Team Revolution.
Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We're joined by Professor Hamilton. Jade, over to you with the nomination process. I don't want to feel, I know we're remote and normally we go off each other's energy, but I don't want to dominate the conversation. So I'll turn over to you to lead through the question.
It's perfectly fine. You did start the episode by saying that you were excited about the topic. So I'm sure the listeners can understand your dominance in representing the conversation today. But yes, Prof, we just wanted to have an idea of your thoughts of what that nomination process for the president would look like. We had some thoughts, but we wanted to hear yours as well.
Well, based on what I've said, and I mean for the listeners, I think the listeners perhaps are aware that you're talking about a non-elected, non-executive president that would be selected in a kind of two-stage process. The nomination done by the prime minister in consultation with the leader of the opposition, and a joint sitting of both houses, in which each house votes separately by secret ballot, right, and so on. So. Here's the problem I have. First of all of this is being done in the context where there is no change being proposed by the current parliamentary cabinet system of governance. That's the first challenge I have with it. So we're retaining the arrangement in which the prime minister and cabinet dominates these decisions, including the choice of the president, and no mechanisms for effective oversight is involved. And certainly no role for the people to weigh in on that decision, right? So that's the first. And in that context, the discussions about the selection of the president is, again, more of the same, where we see that a president could choose someone that is not going to challenge and is, whether or not we keep these quote unquote discretionary elements in the Constitution or not. Sorry?
I think you meant Prime Minister there.
All right, I meant the Prime Minister, right? So whether or not they would keep those kinds of options, the point would be that the Prime Minister would clearly have his or her way. And importantly, the role of the Senate would essentially be the same. And I think that a more thoughtful approach to selection of a non-executive president could utilize the role of the Senate as an elected body in which the representatives of the people in that house that we can move to become an elected body makes the final decision on a president. Okay? So it moves it out of the hands of the prime minister and puts it in a body that ultimately has a role to play with respect to the selection of a president. Those are options. And I think that in the absence of us looking again at the way our government is currently structured and the roles and responsibilities of our executive, the legislature, and the Senate, then we are not really fixing the problem that we have, which is the over centralization of power in the hands of a prime minister and the sense of the voice of the people in decision making and in decisions like the selection of a president.
And Prof, I know because we have been challenged here at JFJ on this, let me be very clear. Yes. Why are we supporting a non-executive president? We have been challenged at our town hall. And we have also been challenged on what we are also proposing, that we don't want a direct election of the president by the people, because it's a balance with the people's representation versus recognizing political realities. So just to articulate for the listeners, for JFJ's view here, that we want the people to be involved. We support the principle of legitimacy, but our fears include this. If we have a president that will be elected by the people, it means that you're going to have to be doing some form of campaigning. And if you're going to be doing some form of campaigning, then more than likely, then you're going to be seeing a president becoming or possibly being seen as political. So let me clarify. again, from JFJ's perspective, because of what we were proposing the president's powers to entail, we wanted to balance it. We want a president that, yes, respect parliamentary sovereignty and independence, because we vote for our parliamentarians, but you want somebody who can look at a bill. For example, the conversations happening, let me not use that bill as an example. The political ombudsman bill recently that was put forward. You want somebody, rather than just signing off on it, say, hold on there. What is the implications of this? Yes, Parliament is there as the elected body that is responsible, but is there the possibility of any unconstitutionality of it? What is the people saying? What are the people saying about this before they sign off? Not that they can hold it up, but perhaps a little bit of a review. So when we have those types of powers that JFJ was proposing and what we have seen in other jurisdictions, we said, let's wait. Direct election for legitimacy, or do we have a broadened representation of who signs off on this president? But to be absolutely clear, we agree with Prof that you do not want that centralized power in the hands of the Prime Minister. Because what is being proposed now, Prof and listeners, is that when you look at the two-tiered system, the Prime Minister will always get his or her selection, which is the challenge that we're having. Right. So I just wanted to put that in context as we keep the conversation.
Yes, and I think the proposal that you're suggesting, again, I suggest is going to also face challenges without those other changes. Yes. Because we have to put those arrangements in place for the checks, the oversight, look again at the size of our cabinet relative to the non-executive members in the legislature. Those kinds of things have to be put in place. Importantly, put in place the decentralized structures that give voice to the Jamaican people in their communities across Jamaica. I think it is when we have those things in place, I think the country could be ready for this discussion about executive versus non-executive. Because when I listen to people talk about this executive president, I think there's a lot of wishful thinking about what it will yield.
Yes.
And I want to say it that way because the challenges are there in front of us. We can see it. We have to tackle the kind of dictatorial powers that we all have grown up on. This is not a simple matter. It's in the DNA of our Constitution. It was there in the 1961 conversations where in Parliament, parliamentarians were talking about this awesome power in the hands of the Prime Minister.
And so we have 2 minutes. So I wanted to bring something out because having read the CRC's report, it's very clear that there will be no electoral reform unless they're willing to say that what they're proposing in phase 1, they are willing to make changes when they get to phase 2, which was a challenge we warned them about with having that phased approach. Because if you read the report, the cabinet structure remains as is.
Absolutely.
And I think there are even some dangers to what they're proposing but we don't have the time to fully get into it. But one of the things that was very clear, Prof, that I want to flag, we have the conversation about the powers of the Governor General now and whether or not the powers of the President would simply transition. That was what the report suggested. There was only a little part of it that suggested that, guess what? Then the administration of governance may change. But that is a very broad statement. But when you look at another section of the report, it says that the powers of the Governor General will transition to the President. However, when JJ was doing our presentation, the CRC, when we were making recommendation, they said, where you get that from? Because the approval of the bills before they become law will be removed. So you find that the powers of the President will actually be less than the powers of the Governor General. So how do we balance that in a minute, Prof?
Again, I can't say I can speak for the thinking behind the CRC report. I think there's a lot of details. At this point, in a minute, I would just urge Jamaicans to not simply look at this matter of a head of state as an act in and of itself that is going to yield the outcomes that we want. There's much more that needs to be done. And I think we can work those out in a system that we know, we understand the problems we have, we can move to fixing them. And when we see that it is not working with the changes that are going to revolutionize the governance arrangement we have in this country, when we start to put serious power in the hands of individuals and communities and down Jamaica, when we begin to hear different innovative approaches to our development challenges, and it's not simply waiting for a cabinet decision about how to develop our country, but and we know how good we are. We've seen it in our sports and in our music and so on. When we begin to unleash that creative energy in the Jamaican society, then we can ask ourselves, what better can our president do to improve where we are? Should we make him or her an executive or not? That's when I think the conversation is needed.
Thank you so much, Professor Hamilton. As usual, I really enjoy listening to you speak. So I hope the listeners and Jade, I hope you're a little bit more excited and not just interested.
Well, I'm certainly more informed. That much I'll say.
She's not with us with the excitement. Thank you so much. I appreciate your views always. That was Professor.
Thank you so much. I am excited about the future of our people and our country if we really roll up our sleeves, get involved, and act and push the society where we want it to go. Thank you so much.
Yes, appreciate it. Jade, your trivial.
Yes, I'll quickly give that information before we are cut out of here. But the trivia question was, when was the last time the Constitution was amended and what was the change? And our winner is Alex Smith on Nationwide YouTube chat. I'm going to ask you to send us a WhatsApp, Alex, to 2397583 so that we can send your prize. But the answer is...
But Alex didn't answer the other part of the question. He only answered one part.
Oh, well, that's true. So I guess Alec has to get half the prize because it was a double prize this week. So Alec has to get half the prize. But I'm going to give the answer now. So the last change was made in July of 2023. And the change was to Section 96.1 and Section 121.1 of the Constitution, which would have changed the age of retirement for both the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Auditor General.
Yes. Heavy topic, but we will try and break it down so that, more of us can be excited and interested in constitutional reform as we talk about the road to republic. So thank you as usual for joining, and we will see you all next week. This is Let's Start Justice. My name is Michael Jackson.
And I'm Jade Williams. Next week.
Justice, the people's champion. Justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention and police brutalization. Class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination.
To join the fight against injustice, contact us at 755-4524 or JamaicансForJustice.org.
The people's champion.
JP said Mary's banana chips. 20% more chips in the banana left them crown. The time by JP said Mary's banana chips is
2 minutes past 2.
The latest result.